Go over there. There we go. All right. I'm here. Proposed decision with many label changes. So I want to give everybody what I think is probably the most important information for you to hear right up front on this. So EPA is looking to mitigate some potential human health risks here, and to do so while also considering some of the benefits of remaining uses. But as you may know, the organophosphates have had some concerns for some time. And so it's a bit of a balancing act. From what I read in the proposed interim decision, and I invite people, if they have other information, to please chime in on this, but it looks to me like Arizona will retain a label for alfalfa with chlorpyrifos. And that's kind of good news if we maintain that ability because it is our highest use pattern in the state. However, there are many other crops that have either occasional or fairly consistent but low levels of chlorpyrifos, which has been diminishing, but still there in some of these crops I'm listing, that Arizona is not really on the proposed list of retention for some of these labels. So these are crops that if you're using chlorpyrifos and it's a really critical use pattern, you don't have any alternatives, I would really like to hear about it. There are other prohibitions based on different application methods and formulations for specific crops. I'll just highlight a couple of those real briefly today. Additional PPE requirements and restricted entry intervals are going to be have been proposed by EPA. Some of those are pretty significant. A little bit of quick history for you on this. In 2015, it was proposed to revoke all the tolerances for chlorpyrifos due to some human health considerations. And that was a decision, there was an opportunity to submit comments. The Arizona Pest Management Center submitted about 4 different sets of comments over a 1-year period at that time. And we were hitting on some of the main crop uses that were still going on at that time, including use in alfalfa, coal crops, sorghum, corn, cotton, and pecans. And so our comments are available online if you want to see those. More recently, last year, EPA published new revised human health risk assessments and proposed interim decision. I'm going to focus on the proposed decision today, which is some of the proposed label changes. Why is EPA doing this? What are the concerns? There are significant human health concerns with this organophosphate insecticide. It's an acholinesterase inhibitor, and there are neurodevelopmental issues for children and developing children, fetal development. And EPA has modeled this risk, and they're concerned about potential sensitivities and susceptibility of children in particular. As you probably know, the Food Quality Protection Act has a 10x safety factor for those risk assessments. In this particular case, EPA has run their risk assessments with and without the 10x safety factor. And they say they're doing that because there's some evolving science and there's some new studies that they plan to be looking at as part of this review. So I'll be presenting some potential decisions at those 2 levels. What are some of the sort of effects of these potential risks or the exposures? So dietary risk is a concern, and that's driven by drinking water concerns, which of course is based on EPA modeling of the pesticides use around the country. It's sometimes not clear how exact or well-informed their models are in terms of the use patterns. But there are occupational handler concerns, post-application risks as well. For all of those risks, there are risks that exist for some crops at the 10x and at the 1x level. So EPA's proposed decision identifies many different steps to try to mitigate that risk. Let's take a quick look at our use pattern in Arizona. This is our Arizona Pest Management Center database information from the 1080s that are submitted. You can see that big blue line there is for chlorpyrifos. And I mentioned this is for 2010 through 2019. I have a point here for 2020, the data are incomplete for 2020, but I just included it because it was interesting to me that the alfalfa use is on the upswing, even without complete data there for 2020. But in general, use in alfalfa and use in all these other crops has really declined quite a lot, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years. The crops that I list there are only the ones that, according to the data, have fairly somewhat regular usage, maybe not every year, but where we see there are other crops where you might see an isolated use here or there, maybe for a particular pest issue that flares up. But this kind of gives you an idea in terms of the amount of use being highest in alfalfa. That's not to say that some of these other uses in these crops might be important, it's, there might be very specific conditions in these crops where we might use it, even though we're using it only on a small percentage of crops. That's important information to continue to share with EPA. These are all the different areas that are covered in the proposed interim decision, and I won't have time to talk about all of these. I'll focus mainly on the proposed use cancellations, and I'll just hit on a couple of the other ones. They're near the top of the list and let you know in broad terms what EPA is suggesting. There are two really important tables in the proposed decision. One of them here deals with, based on the 10x analysis, including the 10x safety factor, the list of crops that are shown over here on the left would retain labeled uses in the states shown over here on the right. That's what EPA is proposing, but they've said very clearly that they're open to additional feedback from the states on any of these specific uses. I just want to point out in this table that Arizona is listed on the retention list for alfalfa, which would be good news for us because of some of those pest needs and because it is one of our important uses. However, Arizona doesn't show up in the rest of this table, which at least suggests that based on the data EPA has now, those might not be retained for use. And these tables are based on their drinking water analysis. And an effort to, at a very fine level, to manage where the chemical is being used and how much. So it's on a state-by-state basis. This table follows the same pattern, but this is for the 1X without the FQPA safety factor. And these are the crops that, if the state's not listed, my expectation is that there wouldn't be a label. And Arizona is not listed for any of these crops here. Now, again, EPA has been very clear that they're open to additional feedback. I mentioned at the bottom here too.
Al?
Yes, hello.
Can I interrupt? This is Peter. There's a chat question, and it's relevant to this slide. It says, will it be available for use in pecans in Arizona? And it looks like it's not on your pecan list right now.
No, it's not. And pecan use was one of the crops that we previously did comment on. Now, this isn't a hard and fast list. EPA is presenting this as, based on their analysis, they're proposing that, these are the states that would retain these uses, but they're saying they want, additional feedback. And so it would be an opportunity, if that's a really important use, for us to be able to comment again on that pecan use. And I would like to interact with anyone on any of those crops with some very specific questions, because they're looking at it at a very fine level. What's the application method? What's the rate? How frequently are we using it? All those kinds of things. So I'll have my phone number up here at the end, and I just invite people to contact me between now and, let's say, about next Wednesday, so we can get those comments in on Friday. Hopefully that addresses the question. Real quick, the rest of the changes that are being proposed, pretty sweeping PPE changes. Again, for any retained label uses, there's additional PPE requirements. That includes everything from clothing to respirator requirements for some of the uses. There are other prohibitions that are presented by EPA based on application method. And so for ground boom application here, for these formulations, liquid and SC, I've highlighted in blue the crops that would be prohibited from those uses. So if these are formulations being applied by ground in these crops for you, then that might be something important that we need to communicate to EPA. And then for the dry flowable, pecans and corn are listed there. So they are looking at a number of use cancellations. Here's something interesting that also seemed contradictory to me a little bit, is that the only real rate change listed in the whole thing is for Arizona citrus, and it's for air blast applications, specifically reducing the AI per acre to 4 pounds. And interestingly, Arizona is also absent from the other list of retained label uses. So that's kind of contradictory to me. But again, if any of these uses are critical, then I think we need to be communicating that to EPA. And I need to hear from stakeholders in order to do that. Or you can submit comments yourself. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. So real quick, the reentry intervals range from, well, there's a table that shows the level of risk based on different reentry times. And if you look at that, to get to a level that's below the concern, it would range from about 2 days to over a week, depending on the crop. And so on a specific crop basis, that's a question I would be asking people about, would be the reentries. So I've talked very briefly about these top 4 changes here. The ones that are shown in blue are pretty standard label changes that we tend to see. Spray drift requirements for this looked similar to what we've seen for other crops, and other language being added to the label that we're seeing pretty consistently. In the news last week, the new administration is evaluating, or reevaluating, I should say, environmental and human health related decisions that were made by the prior administration. And one of those decisions that they're looking at is Chlorpyrifos. As I mentioned earlier, in 2015, a decision was made by EPA, or an attempt to eliminate those tolerances, which would get rid of the labeled uses for this chemical. But there was enough feedback and comments that they were still considering, and they hadn't implemented those changes. And then that was reversed by the previous presidential administration so that we wouldn't be eliminating those uses. However, that's going to be reevaluated now. So that's just on the horizon, something I found out about. I wanted to let everybody know. You can submit comments. Go to regulations.gov. Up here, you might want to write down this number. This is the easiest way to find the place online where you can submit comments if you'd like to. EPA-HQ-OPP-2008-0850. That's the docket number, and that'll take you where you need to go to submit comments. And it's pretty simple. Or you can work with me. What do I need to know? By I mean myself, Al Fournier. In order to best present information to EPA, I would want to get very specific by crop information from people. You know, target pests and all the specific application methods and REI information. So my phone number is here at the bottom of the slide. I have it also on my last slide, 520-705-9903. I have an email list. If you want to stay informed about EPA comments and the deadlines coming up, just send me a private chat with your email address and I will add you to the list. There's one more open comment period that's on my calendar coming up, and that's for February 19th, and that impacts atrazine, which we use quite a bit in corn. Now, this isn't a proposed interim decision. This is a different kind of evaluation that's being done. It's a new type of evaluation that I'm still learning about, but it might be an opportunity for us to comment on atrazine use in corn. And I think that's it for me. I want to thank my sponsors, which is the Western IPM Center and the Specialty Crop Block Program, that both support this work.